extremely excited, but absolutely frightened to moderate this panel. We have some really illustrious authors sitting on the stage right now, and I'm just, yeah. So, what time is it? I'm going to be keeping time. We do need to skedaddle by 5. So, thank you. We have a few questions that, I gave the authors a few questions to kind of think about. And then Ninotchka is going to give a little talk first. But you can read all of their bios in the lovely program. If you haven't gotten one, feel free. Be sure you pick one up. It's a historical document. I'm a historian, so historical document. Pick it up. It's wonderful. But let's begin with Writing as a Catalyst for Change, featuring Ninotchka Rosca, Randy Ribay, Elaine Castillo, and Albert Samaha.
Okay, hi. I'm sorry, I didn't know what the format was, so I prepared some slides. This talk about writing as a catalyst for change has been around since time began. I remember being at Yan'an in China at the very spot where Mao Zedong delivered talks at the Yan'an Forum on Art and Literature. And there was a little photograph there of the 26 writers who attended the Mao Zedong talk, which we, of course, all of us memorized in those days. And I, the person, asked the guide, who among these 26 writers who attended the talk, who among these 26 writers developed actually to become very important writers of China? And they said, the guide said, none of them. And so I said, I think I have forgotten everything, all the words of talk at the end of Forum on Art and Literature. I want you to see this very short reel from the Dakila founder, just to clarify our minds about writing and social change and why. No. No, the first one. You should go to the first one. No. We are disappointed. Can we link?
Can you click on the link? Is that possible?
Oh.
How do we?
There's a mouse on the side of the beginning.
Oh.
It's not linked. It's not linked to the internet. Never mind. Well, the Dakila founder was saying that writing by itself does not produce social change, but rather what it produces is a change in our perception of the world. And I think this is very important for us to keep in mind. I am so terrified of these techie people. I'm just just to, what do you call that? Deflate our hubris a little bit. Writing by itself cannot change society. What it does, it changes our perception of how things are and how things should be. That was the Dakila founder statement. Okay.
Thank you, Ninotchka. So I do have to. So I'd actually prepared a few questions for the panel, and it's up to you how to, who wants to go first, who wants to, and then if you want to respond to each other, that's absolutely fine as well. So the first question that I actually have for you is, your origin stories. I think of writers, and I'm a super nerd, as superheroes in many ways, bringing these stories alive. And so I'd be really curious about what brought you to writing, and what was that aha moment that solidified your identity as an author or writer or novelist. So whoever would like to go first.
They keep passing the buck, and if you're at the last one in the line, it's on you. I can't really remember a time when I wasn't reading. So I think I came to reading first, and that was through my dad, who gave me books. I mean, there's some family legends about me reading at an age that I don't think tracks biologically. But so I was reading my whole life, and I think, and concurrently writing my whole life, but not really considering that was a separate thing. I mean, if I had said I was a writer, I would have been like, I'm my arm. It was just something I did. It was part of my life. So it wasn't until maybe in high school or so that I conceived of, actually it was because a classmate of mine had plagiarized my work. He was like, he kind of knew that I was a good writer, and was like, oh, can I see your paper? Filipino, I'm not saying anything. And I gave it to him in the hopes of helping him, and he plagiarized it, and I was pissed. But it was in being pissed that I realized, oh, this means something to me. That this is not just, that this is my art, but this is also something that I do, and then not only is it something that I do, it's something that I am. So I think that was the rage, really.
I also can't really remember a time when writing wasn't sort of a part of my life, but I guess to fast forward to a point when I transitioned into writing being kind of a way to actually pay the bills. I remember when I was in grad school, I'd come to this point. I had grown up reading magazines and a lot of nonfiction, and went to journalism school to become a journalist, a professional writer. And at that point, a lot of my motivation was definitely very ego-driven. I believed that I was creating this art to fulfill my own creative soul, and that would be enough. And that produced a lot of really indulgent writing that my professors really grinded out of me. And the turning point for me was this essay from George Orwell that a professor gave me called Politics of the English Language. And there's this idea in there where Orwell makes this point that the value of a piece of writing is not in a relationship between the writer and the work, but between the work and the reader. And that really made me flip thinking about what I was doing, that it really didn't matter what my intent was, how smart I thought I was sounding. What mattered was how the work was being received, how the work was engaging with the world outside of itself. And so I came from a totally different perspective moving forward, and just only trying to write things that I felt would resonate and would create impact. And then, after a few years of doing this, I realized that extreme was just as problematic as the initial extreme, because a lot of that's out of your control. So if you're only finding satisfaction when your work resonates in whatever metrics that you have, whether it's page views online, or awards, or book sales, or whatever, you're leaving yourself room for a lot of disappointment. And so over time, I think I've come to balance both of those things, and recognizing that I do feel that the power of the work, the potential for that power, is in thinking about audience and the relationship with the work and the audience, but that in order to be fulfilled as a writer myself internally, it still does need to be ego-driven. It still does need to come from a place of creativity and art and doing things that I'm excited about without prioritizing what I necessarily think other people would be excited about. So that sort of balance is, I think, sort of the maturation of my identity as it stands at the moment.
Thank you.
Yeah. For me, I came to writing a little bit later in life. I loved stories first. I read a lot. I watched a lot of TV and movies. I played a lot of video games, very story-based video games. And then I went to college for aerospace engineering because that's what I was supposed to do, right? To be a good son, do well in school, get an engineering job, make that bank. And I don't know, I just did that for a little bit and I hated it. I switched to English, and after college I became a teacher, and I taught English to middle school and high school students for about 16 years. And started writing about in the middle of that when I was in my late 20s. I think the more that I read, the more that I taught students about books and stories, the more I started wanting to write my own. And I was reading very widely in terms of books for teenagers. And I think I was starting to want to write, and also at the same time starting to see, as much as I was reading, there were still not Filipino characters at the time in middle grade books, in YA books. So also wanting to, just like throw some Filipino characters in YA and put those characters in the stories that I never had when I was growing up, because I never read a book with a Filipino character until I was in college, maybe 20 or 21.
The army of servants in my neighborhood discovered that at the age of 5, 6, I could read and write. And so at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, when all their amos or employers were asleep, having siesta, they would bring me comic books, Ribay magazine, and ask me to read to them. When it was comic books, they would be behind me so they could follow the drawings, and I would read the, what you call those, the balloons. And if it was the YY magazine or the Bulaklak, they would be in front and I would be reading aloud to them. I was 5, 6, 7 years old. They paid me. They gave me 5 centavos, each of them. I had no cash flow problem. And so I realized this might be I reached the conclusion that maybe reading and writing would be a good way to make money. Very wrong conclusion. Very wrong. But that was it. And then, of course, I read Don Quixote de la Mancha when I was 7, and I said, I can do this too. Wow. That was it.
Thank you. I love all of these stories, and so the next question that I have for all of you, and again, round robin to whomever wants to take, is the impact of each of your works is, in my opinion, resounding. What is some of the greatest feedback or reaction you've received over the years from fans, from critics, from family? And maybe to be even a bit more specific, how have Filipinos actually received your work, and what is some of your favorite feedback that you've received from people?
When I wrote my book, which is about kind of examining the role colonialism played in my family's immigration story from the Philippines to the U.S., I hadn't written a lot about Filipino identity and culture. I'd been a journalist doing criminal justice stuff, sports stuff, and so there was in this book I sort of make this point that, my family's story is just one thread in a vast tapestry of history, and I didn't want it to over-represent, because I think when you are a writer who is part of an underrepresented group, you sort of feel this burden to speak for everybody. And I didn't feel that burden in part because there were writers like Randy and Elaine who had come before me and written about their perspectives. And so I really just wanted to focus on mine. And the emails I would get that would move me the most were when other people would tell me about how they would be inspired to examine their own family's history and like study where their family come from and like ask their elders questions about why they came to the U.S. and what those challenges were like. Because I think in a lot of immigrant diasporas, and particularly in ours with our kakahia culture, these are questions that oftentimes the American-born generation doesn't ask. The immigrating generation prefers to shield us from those struggles and help us focus on looking forward and not looking back. So the sort of feedback that always fulfilled me most was hearing that other people felt moved to similarly explore their own family's history. Whether you write about it or not, I felt that it was a really richly rewarding experience for me to do, and I was glad that other people felt that as well.
There's one story that my mom told me recently, or not actually that recently, it was a couple of years ago. In my first novel, the main character is a former NPA rebel, so the New People's Army, the armed wing of the Communist Party of the Philippines. Her character was somewhat based on a cousin of mine whom I'd never met, a cousin who was much older than me because my father was born in 1930. And it was based a little bit on, very, very loosely on some stories that my father, had told me about hiding her from the army in the sort of post-Marcos, or in the Marcos years. And she is still alive. She lives with a lot of the former NPA leadership in a redacted location in Europe. But they do still go back to the Philippines regularly to meet with the current NPA because that struggle still continues. And my mom, she knows about the book, and she had been wanting to be in contact with me, and I was very nervous about that, obviously, because I was writing about this history that I had not lived and I had done extensive research on, and it meant a lot to me personally and politically. But we still have never met. But my mom told me later that she had the book, took the book to the Philippines, and showed it to her comrades in the mountains, and said that they had read it and said, yeah, that's what life was like in the 70s for us. And when my mom told me that, I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm good. I don't need any other reviews. We're done here. So that meant a lot.
Yeah, so for me, I don't know, a few different examples, I think. So one is like, my parents are not readers. With the exception of the Bible, like I never saw my mom and dad read any book my entire childhood, except like the first book that I wrote, which actually is here at Archipelago's station, I think. It's a deep cut, because nobody even knows it exists. But they like printed it out, and they like read it, and they didn't say anything, because we don't talk about anything, but it meant a lot to me that they read it. Like I said, like that was actually the first book that I've seen them read. Other reactions with Patron Saints of Nothing. A lot of times I get kids telling me it's the first time that they've seen themselves in a story that they've read. A lot of times it's read in school, like they're forced to read it. Fine, I was a teacher, so that's great. But they enjoyed it and they saw themselves in it for the first time. That means a lot to me, having not had that when I was growing up. I even had one kid in St. Louis who was a senior in high school who said after graduation he was taking a gap year to go to the Philippines, like my character does. Spoiler alert, but it's past 5 years. It's almost 5 years. So that means a lot. Senator Leila de Lima read it and loved it and handwrote me a letter from prison about it. That was pretty cool. And then with my most recent one, Everything We Never Had, which is about 4 generations of father and son relationships and his family. I get a lot of people who read it and tell me that it made them reflect on their relationship with their parents, with their fathers, Lolos, or whatever. And that means a lot to me too. That's kind of like what I want people to get out of that book, is to create that space, have that space for them to think about their own lives.
Well, there's a kind of class divide and, and political divide with regards to responses to my work. My older sister was teaching literature, and I look at her reading list. I wasn't there. I was like, what the hell? Yeah, that's one side, and then the other side was way back in 1986 when I returned from the United States to the Philippines after 7 years of exile. And one of the first people to meet me was Commander Dante, who I had never met before, Bernabé Boscaino. And he came up to the car where I was in and he said, "Hi, in Tagalog, we were reading you in the mountains." So there's a kind of class and political divide there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, each of you. So my next question is actually geared toward education. I'm a community college professor, and I read recently an article about how high school students, and particularly those in public education, are leaving K-12 without having read an entire book, novel or otherwise. This has spilled into higher education, and many of us who have encouraged students who A, have never read a book to completion, B, have difficulty focusing well enough to sit 20 minutes to read anything longer than 5 to 10 pages, and C, are challenged by more complex analysis of themes, multiple plots and characters, unfamiliar vocabularies, etc. So my question to the authors is, what would you say to school districts and policymakers who are not leaving any room in the curricular space to cultivate these skills, not to mention a potential joy for reading? And what are your suggestions to teachers? Any teachers in the room? Sweet, all right. What are your suggestions to teachers who push back against these practices? Loaded question.
Yeah, so I'll jump in, I guess, since I was a teacher for a while. So it's infuriating to me, even when I was teaching, state test, right? It becomes all about the numbers, and politicians and policymakers just want to look at a number. They're like, how good is this school? Oh, it's a good school, it's a bad school. And even now, right, you're looking for places to live, and you're like, what are the schools like? And you just look at the one number that's on goodschools.com or whatever, which is trash sometimes. And so yeah, in a lot of times I have been in schools where the reading of novels, books have been replaced by the SPAT literature textbooks, where just all the excerpts that are meant to prep them for the state test or the SATs or ACTs or whatever. And I don't know, when I was teaching, to me it was always more important that my students walked away with a love for reading than whatever their score was, because I think that would serve them better down the road. I have a master's in literacy, and one of the best predictors for success, I can put quotes around that loosely because that's a fraught word to begin with, is how much children read and when they're small children, right? How many books are in their home, how much their parents read in front of them. These things are far more important for building somebody's long-term critical literacy skills than the state test where you read a passage and answer multiple choice questions. With that said, what I would say to policymakers is probably too inappropriate to share here publicly. But yeah, my message to teachers is you got to be subversive, right? You got to find ways to get those books into the classroom and into students' hands and connect with each other. Others who value the same things. There are networks out there, organizations out there like Disrupt Texts or Project Lit that are very much all about fostering a love for reading in students, and they connect and they share ways that they're doing that with each other. I think that's the way to do it. I'm not terribly optimistic about policymakers suddenly changing perspectives because it takes thinking. That's sometimes difficult for them. But yeah, I don't know. That's my answer. I've been talking for a while, so I can stop now.
It does seem that there's kind of this sense of resignation and inevitability that a lot of people apply to it, where it's all these kids are on TikTok or whatever, so they only want videos, so we need to meet them where they're at. And I think about where I was at middle school and high school, and probably unlike these other wonderful writers on the panel, I didn't do the readings. Like, I would read like the Spark Notes and then just try to conjure writing skill in order to get through it. But I would, like Randy said, I still had, my mom had a lot of books in our house. I read like Sports Illustrated. I read books about things that I was particularly interested in. So I thought I didn't like reading, but I only liked sports. But reading was sort of my vehicle to that interest. And that said, when I was in high school, there would be books that I would end up reading just because, if you put the broccoli in front of people enough, eventually I'll be like, oh, actually, this, Maya Angelou book sounds kind of interesting. Or this Toni Morrison book sounds kind of interesting. Wait, it's like a ghost? I don't know if anyone's read Beloved. But, so I do think that, as someone who was not necessarily fully, someone that probably spent more time watching TV as a kid than reading, and probably spent time in front of screens that's similar to a lot of the kids now. Just having even though I wasn't reading every book, the 10, 20, 30% of books that I would read would capture me in a way that would make me curious to read further. So I feel for education policymakers that might think, well, these kids aren't doing the reading, they're not going to do the reading, so we might as well just eliminate it. I think that sort of doesn't give those kids curiosity, that their natural curiosity, enough credit to blossom if you just keep giving them the chance to pick up the book. So I would advise them to just keep giving them the chance, and then eventually they'll pick one up. And even if it's just one book, that could be the one that really ignites their passion for it.
Actually, Atlantic Monthly just came out with a piece on students of elite universities, Ivy League universities, who cannot finish a book. They say it's too long, that kind of thing. So this is a very grievous matter, especially for writers. No, that's our market. I don't know how one can push back, really, on this thing. There have been so many things people have come up with trying to get people to read, the young people to read, flash fiction, those digital poems, terrible, all of them. Yeah, very easy, it's like bubblegum, that kind of thing. But still, the reading is not there. The desire to read is not there. I think maybe we have kind of separated reading from the normal activities of life. I will tell you, the organization I belong to, AFIRM, AFIQRM, is the only organization in the whole United States who will join a rally carrying placards that reproduces the covers of books several times. And people are like, are you crazy? No, we are civilized.
I think, like all forms of resistance, this is not a one-front war. Which is to say, I don't think we can talk about the foreclosing of children's attention or the changes in how we approach reading or literacy if we don't also talk about how late capitalism has impinged upon our time, our leisure time, the time we have to read, the time we have for ourselves to think and reflect, and not only that, but how multinational corporations like social media companies are disintegrating the mental health of children and changing fundamentally their developmental evolution, which is to say many of the kids that I know, or my friends' kids, are growing in a very fundamentally different way in terms of what they are exposed to via the internet and via social media. That is unlike how, I can speak for myself, how I was raised. I don't actually, and I mean, quite frankly, if books are cooked, books are cooked. I'm not in this just because it's happens to be the market that I have devoted my life to. I think it's not true that we've lost the capacity to read or the capacity to love reading. Most of us are reading all the fucking time. We're reading on our phones. People who have gone down the MAGA QAnon K-hole are reading a lot. It's a lot of text that they're going through. The problem is that critical reading has been replaced by conspiratorial reading, or critical thinking has been replaced by conspiratorial thinking, because critical thinking is not lucrative. Critical thinking does not serve capitalism, it doesn't serve global militarism, it doesn't serve extraction of capital, it serves the development of our souls. Conspiratorial thinking, however, is incredibly lucrative, and we have all around us, in our pockets, essentially portable casinos that have gamified our attention such that the muscles in us, because the thing is, I just don't believe that we don't like to think. If you want to have beef about Homo sapiens and evolution, we have a different panel, y'all. But Homo sapiens we're Homo sapiens because we think, because it is biologically, viscerally pleasurable in an evolutionary way for us to think and to think deeply. The problem is that desire to think has been co-opted by capitalism. So I don't know if that's a call to arms for teachers. The thing is, it's not in my soul to ever tell teachers what to do, given the wasteland that teachers have to face every day for compensation that is fucking insane. Sorry, I'm using ableist language. But, for me, I think remembering that this battle has to happen on multiple fronts, and we have to understand all of the ways the world that we are living in is impinging upon our children and ourselves, and understand how to bring back critical thinking in our lives, not because it's important, not because we have to, not because books are important. I mean, if we lose books, I don't come from people who read either. Largely grew up with my mother's family, and my mother's relationship to literacy is shaky. My father was a big reader. That's the reason I became a reader, and so I associate it with a lot of class privilege and anxiety. I'm not here for the survival of books necessarily. I'm here for the survival of thinking and critical reading, and how that happens. If that happens through the digital space, if we can manage to wrest it away from the forces of capitalism, then I'm happy to read in the ether. But I want us to be critical readers there, and to return to the joy and evolutionary pleasure that is in us, that makes us thinkers and readers to begin with.
But don't you think that practically every political paradigm demands a certain, restriction of critical thinking?
Fascism, yeah.
Not only fascism.
And I would also add to that, for educators in the room are probably very well aware, right, that we're living in an era, moment of extreme book banning going on in our schools and libraries. ALA statistics last year said over 4,000 different books were challenged in schools and libraries in the United States. And I think that's very much something that is also feeding into this, right? This idea of books bad, especially books by people of color, queer people. So it's part of this larger organized effort to get people to not read, or to not read certain books. And I think there is something that we can do in that regard, is just pay attention to your school boards and what's going on in your children's schools, if you have children. And speak out and show up, because people who are challenging and banning these books are showing up, and they're very well organized. And if they go to a school board and say, hey, these books shouldn't be read, and there's 100 people shouting down at the school board, the school board's going to be yeah, okay, if there's nobody else speaking in defense of books.
This is a tangent question, just to kind of piggyback on this, but apart from your own books, which again I don't love, what is one book that you would recommend to our audience, to folks, that this is you need to read this. Absolutely need to read this.
I mean, off the tip of my tongue would just be like the one that's the most challenged book in the U.S. right now, which is Genderqueer, which is a memoir about somebody growing up non-binary, and I think that's an extremely important topic to be thinking about and for students to be learning about and reading about, developing empathy for, or being able to see themselves in. And yeah, there's a reason it's the most challenged book, right? I think that can just kind of point you in the direction of what you should be reading right now.
Off the top of my head, I think Yagayasi's Homegoing, which sort of traces the ancestral lineage of basically a family that begins pre-colonialism in West Africa and ends with them as enslaved people, and then civil rights movement, and basically just tracing the history of enslavement in America and all the forces that upheld it over time.
I can recommend 100 books maybe. But for the needs of her times, I think 1984 is something we have to read and understand how the mind itself can be, crumpled into nothingness.
Well, this is personal experience. I just read The Lord of the Rings for the first time over the summer. I was like, I'm turning 40.
That's some indie novel?
And then, it's like a small publisher. I think he might go somewhere, though. It's funny because I always, after I finish writing a book, I'm like, oh, I'm going to read something completely different, and it won't have anything to do with, what I work on. And of course, it reveals everything about what you just worked on in your whole life. But I think I would recommend it not only because, I was wary of it because it's such a big Western canon, but at the same time, it has been co-opted by a lot of far-right forces, the kind of story about the survival of, Western civilization. That is one interpretation of Lord of the Rings, but I keep thinking about a character in The Two Towers, Faramir, who I don't know if there's Lord of the Rings people here, but Faramir in The Two Towers is the hottest man in English fiction. I'm so sorry. Mr. Darcy can go. But he talks about wanting to restore his city. And he quite not quite famously, but he resists the power of the ring. So the ring that could promise to give him power that would help him restore the city that he'd like to see restored. And I think about it when I think about people who have experienced oppression or destruction and who are tempted by, let's say, forces that would allow them to be reinstated in power. And he says, well, he wouldn't pick up the ring even if it was on the side of the road. But then he says that was a city that he would like to see it restored, but he wants to see her as a queen among queens, not as a mistress of slaves, not even a kind mistress of willing slaves. And I think that's such a poignant perspective for someone who thinks the liberation of my city, the restoration of my culture, my world, everything that I've lost is only possible if that liberation is collective.
Last question, and then we're going to actually open it up for questions from the audience. And this is kind of Ninotchka actually mentioned yesterday in her keynote that among the millions of books that are published in the U.S. annually, only 12 of them are authored by Filipinos, as an average. So just from where you're sitting as authors, and what can we collectively, speaking to what Elaine just said, can we do to amplify the voices of emerging from our people, from the Philippines and in the diaspora, who are telling our stories?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. What can we do collectively to amplify the voices of our folks from the Philippines and the diaspora who are telling our stories?
I mean, I think the quick reflexive answer is like, because we still live in late capitalism, to like support the work, buy the work. I spent way too much money on children's books out there. There's a lot of really good children's books, but one thing that did give me hope is like I saw all these children's books with these very, very specific like tribal histories. Like there was a book about like an Ilocano experience. There was a book about like a Maranao experience, which is like where my family is from. And there's this really great irony where I feel like there's like all this fantastic representation to the degree that there's no longer just a Filipino children's book. There's a Maranao children's book. Like at this, I feel like one of the stories of immigration in America is just when we all started to like get our footing and our upward mobility and our representation and figure it out, the empire's like starting to crumble, like in large part because of the backlash against that. And so to me it's just such a tragedy if just as all of these like wonderfully representative stories for children and for more than children, for adults, are coming to fruition and are having opportunities to like reach a market, if kids are like no longer reading or people are no longer buying books and the market like shuts down just as these opportunities are opening up to people who look like us. So I'm sure there are more like profound answers that everyone else on the panel can dig into, but I'll take the easy one, which is like to buy the work, to buy the books, because ultimately...
Books, y'all, the marketplace is outside.
Because ultimately that is, until we figure out a new system, and I hope we do, the way for us to subsist and navigate and survive and advance in our current system is to like collectively channel our resources towards the people, the ideas, the beliefs that we value and that we want to continue to see.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Very much need to read each other's stories, tell each other's stories. I know there's writers here as well that have stories to tell, and to, you know, remember, free yourself also from, I mean, it would be cliche to say the burden of representation. I mean, I think we all are aware of that. Not just because writing into representation matters, art, just to say, you know, the kind of, in all capital letters, can be a bind also. I think remember that what we really seek in books, of course we seek representation, but we also seek recognition. And we recognize things in each other's work when we are vulnerable and specific. I mean, I recognize Faramir, I recognize my husband. So, Faramir, that's not a Filipino novel. So I think understanding that in order that we have to do the work of recognizing each other and being recognized, that is, along with representing each other and being represented. I think remembering that when you guys tell your stories as well, and the next time you're up here, I think, and then we can be in the audience saying, thank you.
On a more practical side, I discovered something that they were doing in the Philippines. When this girl who was doing her master's in fine arts sent me some photographs. She had used one of my short stories to create a triptychs, huge paintings based on my short story. And I thought this was very fascinating when you cross the divide, you know. And they do this now in the Philippines, you know. They take stories, turn them into film, and vice versa. They turn them into art pieces. And it's a very strong kind of support from the print to the visual, back and forth. I don't know if this is done in the United States. I haven't heard of. Do we have a book which has been turned into a screenplay? Yeah, something like that, you know. I think it would go a long way towards increasing the visibility of both the visual and the written.
Yeah, and I did not mean to go last on this one because everybody else gave really great answers that I can't add too much to already. But I would say, in addition to supporting, making them visible, and all of that, it's like advocating for them, right? I think just kind of thinking about your own sphere of influence. Many of you are teachers, librarians, parents, community members, right? Like there's a million different ways that you can advocate for these books. Yes, you should buy them, and you should sell out the marketplace. Let all the booksellers there just go home empty-handed. Starting book clubs, advocating for the use of our stories in schools, as deserving in a place in the curriculum. Thinking about even just like different workplaces. I don't know. I can't think of great examples because I'm a teacher and that's where my mind goes. But I don't know. If you're a computer programmer, like computer programming, I don't know. That's my thing. Anyways, think about your sphere of influence. How can you advocate for our stories? And not just, I would say not even just, we're here at a literary festival, but our stories in all shapes and forms, not just necessarily on the page, right? Films, comics, podcasts, literary journals, it's all out there. It's there, it exists, people are doing this stuff. Figure out ways you can raise it up with where you are in your life and what you have the capacity to do.
Thank you. I'm going to add one more thing, just because I teach Philippine Studies at City College of San Francisco, and the thing that I would actually advocate is learn Filipino and buy Filipino books in Filipino, and read those. And Dulhati Bautizos de Gadang Setenta is phenomenal. There's so much literature from the Philippines that is deemed inaccessible in many ways because we've lost that part of the language. And that goes not just for Tagalog, but for Visayan, Hiligaynon, Ilonggo. There's so much great literature from the Philippines. We have. So we have 10 minutes. I'm going to say 8 so we can take a picture and do all these, if you want to say hello. Does anybody have any questions? All right.
I'm just here for the Ribay program. And so I'm well immersed with the publishing situation there, especially for books that mirrors social realism. So this is a really simple question. How do you fight, or how do you respond to the inevitable, which is the bashing, negative comments online, and sometimes red tagging that they do to writers who talk about these important matters in their books?
Well, bashing online, I'm just offline, babes. I've not been on the internet, just being the offline boyfriend you want to be in the world. But for the red tagging, that is different. I remember shortly after the election being contacted, and we did have to help people smuggle documents out of the country because there seemed to be a real risk that documents, for example, that would talk about the realities under the Marcos dictatorship would be potentially destroyed. So there was a real sense of urgency about stories, books, documents, historical archives that needed to be saved and taken out of the country. And I hesitate even sometimes to speak. I try to speak about it when I'm in Europe or in the US, when I have the privilege to be able to speak about it, where friends don't have that same privilege. I've been reg tagged. I know a lot of other people's books have been reg tagged. I think a lot of us, Randy was talking about it when he was talking about book banning. We have a rise in censorship around the country. I think what gives me, around the globe, I think what gives me hope is exactly what I saw, that network of people underground moving with each other to help smuggle documents out, to keep ensuring that books and stories kept surviving, kept getting into the right hands, that the universities that I talked to that said, can you store this archive, stepped up and said, our friends would say yes. So there is a whispered network, or there are people who are working tirelessly to make sure that what regimes would like to snuff out doesn't get snuffed out. So I hold my hope in that.
First up back there, and then go back there.
I am a 7th and 8th grade middle school teacher, and we actually read, thank you, we read Randy's Patron Saints of Nothing in my ethnic studies class and in my ELD class. That's for those of us who are also immigrants from the Philippines, that's ESL now. And I guess my question to the panel, and if you don't mind, can you record their answer? Because I know that your question earlier was like, how can like policymakers like change their policies to integrate more books, like the books that you guys have put out there in the world. But what is like your message to the young people who have read books like Randy's and who will eventually read the more mature books that the other panelists will eventually read in the future? No pressure.
Yeah, you're like, we're gonna record this? I was like, oh no. What are words? Just flee my brain. Mine's just simple, just like read. Just like read, like find the books that they don't want you to read and read those books, right? And then think critically about what is it about this book that someone doesn't want me to read and why? And then you start to read more of them. All right, collectively, what's the pattern here? What's connecting these books and why don't they want me to read them? And then start secret underground book clubs, especially in the states with the most bands. And just read, and read those books that they don't want you to read.
There are always posts on Facebook. And this is where you can access all the banned books, because we always share the posts. We're not telling you to access the banned books here.
My question is pretty simple, just for all of you. What is the most important advice you can give to aspiring writers that are looking to follow in your guys' footsteps?
I actually heard something really helpful that Steph Curry said he would say to himself 20 years ago that really resonated with me now, and I wish I could have said to myself then, which is to not compare yourself, to not draw self-validation from what others around you are doing, and to focus on kind of what draws your passions. I think that one of the dangers is that people in pursuit of the sort of accolades that they might not be getting, but they see other people around them getting, will veer from what initially moved them to write or create, and then will look back with their accolades thinking like, damn, but I didn't actually do what I wanted to do, right? Like, no one gets into this vocation like to get rich, and so I think it's like helpful to just think about like what it is you got into this for and how to like hew as closely as possible. As hard as that is in like a digital media, social media age, to somehow maintain the like mental discipline to just focus on what you're doing and not draw any discouragement or disappointment from any external forces, and to just find peace within and focus on the work that you're most passionate about.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. I think the other thing to build on that is something that I realized not writing my latest book, and then it was echoed at a really great panel earlier. You okay, babes? It was echoed earlier at a really great panel with Angela Garbes and Jen Soriano about family and healing and essentially write into the fear. The thing that you're afraid to write, and it might take time. There were things in my first novel that I hinted at, but I wasn't the person yet that could write them. And it's going to be 7 years, and I'm that person. But it takes time, so I'm not saying, oh, this thing I have to face this fear today and then get it slayed and then I'm good. No, it'll take time, but write into that fear. The thing that you're afraid to write, the thing that you're like, this could destroy my entire life, the thing that could destroy your family, the thing that, all of those voices, all of that fear is, usually standing in the way of exactly what you should be working on. I'd say write it to the fear.
Mine just quickly is just read a lot, write a lot. It's like a skill, like everything else. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And be curious about everything.
I have been asked this so many times, and I never know what to say. Mainly because I belong to a generation that was not self-analytical. We wrote, and writing was like breathing, as natural as breathing. We disappeared into the story. The most important thing for me is the integrity of the story. When they were putting out another edition of State of War, they asked me to go through the thing, and I hate rereading anything I had published. I never reread, but I had to proofread. And so I was like, that wasn't too bad. Did I write this? Where was I? I was not there. We had no ego involved in the writing. The story was the dominant thing, the integrity of it, the structure of it, and the enlightenment of it.
And that is time. Thank you. Can we give a round of applause to all?